Well, we're back for another NZ Aviation Podcast, and we're into February. And Martin, you are in the Hawke's Bay, and I bet it's hot.
It is very hot. Very hot.
How hot?
Oh, it's been 30 degrees today.
Yeah?
Yeah.
What do they fly in there?
Really
80 hours. 80 hours, isn't it?
ATRs and dashes. Yep.
They used to send 737s, Air New Zealand 737-200s into Napier for quite a while.
Wow.
Can you imagine that?
No, I can't actually.
Yeah, they were quite a
I've seen a 757 come, and I've seen the Air Force arrive here before.
Yeah, they'd be light, of course.
Yeah.
This week's podcast features our first overseas contributor, and that is Shamir Raki, who is in Ontario. I think it's Waterloo, Ontario in Canada. He's been an aviation enthusiast for a long time, worked at airports, sort of knows the business, Martin. He'll be dropping in to give us a Canadian view where it's, I think, minus 50 degrees or something.
Something crazy. Yeah, it's been pretty cold over there.
So we'll be talking about a few things. I think he's talking about WestJet.
Yeah, he talks about WestJet. He also talks about an old favourite of mine, CP Air, because when I was a kid, we used to get toys, plastic aeroplanes emblazoned with CP Air, and we had no idea in South Africa what that meant.
Right. They had a great livery. It was orange on the top and silver down below. Remember that?
Yeah, and I don't think they were very big, but they seem to be branded up on all the cheap Chinese toys that we used to buy.
I think they were quite big. They had a big network. They went to, I think, the UK. They came to New Zealand for a while, I think, and all sorts of places. And they had big aircraft, DC-10s, 747s, merged with Air Canada, I think, in the end.
The thing that I was like, Canada in the winter is the de-icing. That always amazes me, how quickly they de-ice a plane.
Yeah.
Sitting there in those basins at the end of the runway, spraying them down with those automated or mechanical gantry things. It's pretty impressive.
And also being the 50th anniversary of the 747, we're going to talk about that in general terms in this podcast, but also Samir will be talking about the history there. Everybody every country that's had the 747 has its own story with that aircraft, you know. It's interesting. So we'll look at that. And Samir Raki will be a bit later on in this podcast. And Martin, that will be the sort of thing to come. We're going to be talking to a few people in the next few weeks. It's going to be interesting. Captain Canada will be on, speaking of Canada, will be on the program.
He's pretty good, Captain Canada.
He's doing all right. No floaties, I think is one of his phrases. So that'll be in the next few weeks. And I'll be talking to Steve Thomas, who is the son of Dave Thomas, who was one of the original NAC 737 captains. I met Dave, Martin, back in the 90s when I made a program on the 737 in New Zealand. And a lot of those guys were still around, you know. And
would he have been one of the guys flying it into Napier?
He probably took it into Napier at some stage, though he was probably retired by about 80, 81, 82. Totally possible, though. But he was there from the start, and Steve's been going through all his, memoirs and papers. We're going to be going through that and sharing some of the stories. That should be really good. Yeah,
that will. A little bit of New Zealand.
And Dave was such a nice guy. What a lovely guy. I remember he told me when we were having an interview that I asked him, about Wellington and that, Nor'Wester. And he was flying the Viscount before the 737, I mean, all the 7-3 guys came from Viscounts. Can you think of, that's such an unlikely sort of match or progression, isn't it?
Yeah, that's interesting because I remember reading an accident report, it had been some years ago, and it was about Air India. I don't know if you remember at the time, they were having a lot of landing incidents with the A320s that they just got.
Yes, I do, yeah.
Yeah, and it's because the pilots got to bid on the left-hand seat in the A320 based upon seniority and the number of hours flown.
Right.
And a lot of these senior captains had huge amounts of hours on the 748s.
Right, yeah.
And so anytime something went mildly wrong, they reverted to their old training.
Yeah, I can just imagine.
And they seemed to land them short.
Right.
So that's what happened. They landed A320s short. And the root cause analysis and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, it's because they were flying them like a big turboprop.
Well, I think that some of the pilots at NAC back in the day, if they were over a particular age, They basically kept him on the Viscounts because it just wasn't sort of worth doing all the conversion training, and there's apparently quite a bit. Because it's a completely different philosophy of, or the way to fly it, right? So high drag, high power right at landing. It was the opposite for the turboprops, wasn't it? You sort of coast in.
Yeah. Coast in, and if you do a bit short, give it a bit of a blip, and off you'd go.
And as soon as you touch down, those reverse props are going to stop you. No time.
Yeah, and so you can imagine how hard it must have been from the guys coming from the DC-7-7Cs into a 707. That would have woken them up, eh?
Yeah. I was watching the interview with, what was his name? Captain Hutchison. I'll think of his first name. The Concorde guy. And there's a series of interviews with him at Duxford, and he said that the 707 was a sloppy plane to fly. It was always requiring, resetting, as opposed to the VC-10, which just, you pointed it and it just sat there,
Oh, there are some great YouTube resources, and there is a very good piece about the VC-10 doing the sort of milk run up through East Africa back to the UK. And that's what the pilot says. He even mentions it. He says, unlike our other aircraft in the fleet, the 707, the VC-10 is completely viceless, blah, blah, blah. And you can just see they're sitting there relaxed as and it's just coming in like it's on rails.
Yeah. John Hutchison is the guy I'm talking about.
Very interesting.
But I guess who cares, really, as long as it didn't burn too much gas. You get a lot of people in it, had the range. And that's the American utilitarian approach, I suppose.
Absolutely. All comes down to the business case.
Exactly. And if you're not man or woman enough or whatever to keep your hands on the controls and keep an eye on things, well, maybe you shouldn't even be flying it anyway. I don't know.
Yeah, there's always they can always get another pilot.
Yeah, but you can imagine coming from the docile Viscount to something like the 7.3, which is a completely different beast. But anyway, Dave, I remember Dave saying that when I asked him about the Viscount in Wellington, his face sort of creased up and he said, "Oh, I remember one real bad night at Wellington in the Viscount." And that's all he said.
I don't know if I'd have been happy.
Well, their wings were snapping off too. Remember, their wings were snapping off for a while.
Yeah.
In fact, if you go through the list of accidents of Viscounts, disasters, you'll find a good percentage of them is from wing structural failure. Anyway, so we'll hear from Steve Thomas in the next few weeks, Martin, and Captain Canada coming up. Really looking forward to speaking.
Yeah, that'll be real cool.
I think he's really onto something, and what a pioneer. Wish I'd done it myself. All right. Air New Zealand flight to Shanghai, 7879. Turned around 5 hours into its flight. It was last week. It's hard to know what happened here, Martin. It seems that if you were listening to the Foreign Minister speaking in Parliament on Thursday, he was saying it was basically an Air New Zealand screw-up. The Chinese and New Zealand government had no clue that this was about to happen, and that, it was Air New Zealand's screw-up. The initial reporting was that there was something wrong about the registration of the aircraft. I don't see how that works. And also that there had been some reference to the airline using Taiwan in its advertising or in its naming of the route, saying it was a country rather than a province. The Chinese are very sensitive about that. And that Qantas apparently has done a deal recently to call it a province. Who knows what's going on here? What do you reckon?
Well, I suspect it is primarily, I suspect the legal reason is that it is something to do with paperwork mentioning Taiwan. However, I do think the actual reason is the Chinese were fully aware that the Taiwan issue was there, and they were just waiting for the right time to use that where it would cause the most embarrassment. Because it is really interesting that people were talking about the China relationship, and then bang, the next day a plane gets turned back.
And also,
isn't that convenient?
Yeah, there's also this trade promotion or this tourism promotion. What was it? Year of Tourism that's been delayed. And Huawei issue is sort of red hot with 5G and Spark's program, though with Elon Musk's thing, you've got to sell your shares in Spark.
Yeah, I mean, and that Huawei or whatever it's called.
Huawei.
Okay, fair enough. It might have a backdoor in it. Maybe it does. But Cisco and the rest of them sure as hell have backdoors in them, because that's what Five Eyes is all about. So, personally, do I care who's reading my stuff? Because, geez, you compile a list of people who aren't reading it. Actually, that's more like it.
Yeah, look, you don't want another power being able to access your military equipment,
No.
communications, data, storage, do you? I'd say no.
Well, no.
These, I mean, with all respect to the Chinese, they're not a democratic country.
No, they're not.
But also you can...
So then maybe New Zealand should stop cozying up to China then.
Well, that's...
Every opportunity.
That's a very good point. Very good point. In fact, that is the point.
Yeah. So, all right then.
Too much to be earned.
Have principles. Yeah, well, exactly. And, I need a cheap something from, okay, I'll go onto the Alibaba site and buy it. Oh, why are TVs so expensive? Oh, let's get China building them again.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you can't have it. You got to make a choice somewhere along the line.
Well, that's the issue. And also, we've got a different sort of government in the USA, our ally, different from the Obama administration and the way they relate to China. So now we have to, pick who we're friends with or who we obviously gravitate towards. We've got to be very careful, don't we?
Yeah, you do. And be careful. If you do pick a fight with China, the warehouse will go out of business like 2 hours later.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if you control all the major routers on your network, the 5G network, if Huawei decided to turn it off, they probably could.
Yeah. So I wonder where that leaves Spark.
Well, they're going to have to buy, they'll buy European or American gear. I don't think it makes a huge difference to them.
Right. Well, it'll be interesting to see how the New Zealand government handle all of this, and I'm glad I'm not in that situation because it's probably never been more difficult, right? I mean, the way things are at the moment. And obviously, if they're flying the 787-9 to Shanghai, it's either fitting in with that very limited, what is it, an 80-minute rule or even less now for diversions, or they're flying with engines that don't have a problem.
Yeah, I guess those must be the new engines.
Yeah.
Must be.
It would get on your goat if you're a passenger on that plane and you were 5 hours into the flight and you turned back. That's 10 hours.
Well, and it's quite interesting that you're 10 hours on a plane, you haven't got anywhere, and it's an airline mistake. Yeah, I reckon the damages they'll make up to you must be pretty good because they basically admitted it's our mistake.
Yeah. Speaking of problems for Air New Zealand, they also had a flight delay which made a lot of people mad in Christchurch. I think they can't remember the exact circumstances, but I think they spent about 3 hours on the ground in Christchurch or something, and overall the experience lasted, was it 7 or 9 hours or something? And
they tried to get into Queenstown.
They couldn't get into the gate. They couldn't get into the gate.
Yeah.
I mean, how absurd is that? I mean, come on.
Yeah. Yeah, then sat on the tarmac in Christchurch and flew back to Auckland.
Can't you open it's not an international flight. Can't you just open the door, roll up the steps and let them off? I've arrived at Los Angeles where there's been no gates. You go to one of those remote stands, everyone gets off, a bus pulls up, you get in, you go in.
Yeah, no, that's weird. And also interesting timing because the week before Air New Zealand was signalling that their growth hasn't been up to scratch and blah, 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 blah.
I wanted to talk about that.
Yeah, so it all seems to come in a batch, doesn't it? So sort of bad financial news or business news, then the Queenstown debacle.
Well, they came in about 100 million shy of estimates.
Yeah, quite a lot.
That's quite a lot. And as soon as I saw those figures, though, what do I know? But my gut feel was other people are eating their lunch because they're cheaper.
Yes.
Air New Zealand creates great airline, great service, really safe, all of that, fantastic people. I like the livery, no problem with that. But here's the thing, they're twice or 3 times as much as the competition. How does that happen?
Well, I've been looking at international flights recently, and every now and again New Zealand come up with a special, but it's still basically the same as what Emirates or Cathay Pacific are charging to Europe. And that's the Air New Zealand special. when it's their normal price, it's like $800 to $1,000 more expensive.
And not only that,
telling,
domestically, I mean, everyone knows. And I don't know why people delude themselves, because if you say, I fly the competition, because I'm getting there for $49. What are you paying? 280?
Yeah.
300?
Exactly, yeah.
Oh, but they're never on time. BS. They've only ever not been on time for me out of dozens and dozens of flights once.
Oh, yeah.
In fact, in our last podcast, remember the time, Jetstar were only like less than a percentage point behind Air New Zealand for on-time departures.
It's exactly right. There's very little in it.
So a few things, Martin, that Air New Zealand might have to work on, but it'll be interesting to follow and see what, hopefully we'll find out the real story is behind this aircraft turning back. If it was somebody who made a bad decision, that's a firing offence, surely.
Well,
wouldn't you say?
We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see.
We'll see.
All right, moving right along, and old Air, A380.
A380, yeah. So, been talking about this for a while. What is the prognosis for the A380 line? And it turns out that after a long discussion with Emirates, following a review of its operation, Emirates is reducing its A380 order book from 162 to 123 aircraft. They're going to take delivery of a further 14 A380s over the next 2 years. That basically reduces the backlog to zero, and that will be the end, potentially, highly likely, the end of the A380 line. And instead of taking those extra, I think it's 39 A380s, they're going to take 40 A330-900s and 30 A350-900s, so a total of 70 aircraft. Gee. Almost a 2-for-1.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's okay for Airbus.
Interesting. And I presume that means Emirates will not be taking the 787.
Oh, okay. Yeah, of course.
But there was some issue with the 787. They were interested in the 787-1000, but the engines aren't powerful enough for Dubai in the summer.
Do you?
So that's a big order for the A330-900.
Do you think though that you're Airbus. How much did they put into the A380 program? Have they broken even yet? Are they ever going to break even?
No, they say they're not losing money anymore.
Okay, so the air travel market keeps on growing. What, at about 6-7% a year, something like that, minimum. Does the need for Well, first of all, why can't people fill up a big plane? I don't understand it. You used to be able to fill up a big plane, but now you can't. What's changed?
Yeah, well, so people talk about that. Why don't the airlines put 750 seats on the A380? And no one ever says it's because they can't fill it up, because of course they can fill it up just by reducing the tickets. You hear all these arguments or discussions about, oh, no, but it doesn't suit the airline's brand, and they don't need to because they make enough money with 560 seats. But at the same time, these airlines then turn around and say, oh, the A380 is too expensive to run. It's really weird. So the A380 is too expensive to run, but you could fit another 300 people in it, right? And in some cases more. Some airlines are putting less people in the A380 than they are in their 74s.
Yeah. I don't get it.
It just makes no sense. Yeah, and then the passengers, every passenger that gets off an A380 is grinning from ear to ear saying, oh my God, that's the best flight I've ever taken. But I guess that doesn't matter. Apparently, if Airbus had done a Neo, more airlines would have committed, although Willie Walsh at British Airways, he says he's a big fan of the A380. He says they're just too expensive.
Oh, well, what if you lower, because we've talked about that before, what if you just lowered the price for a while?
Yeah. And, interesting, the backlog finishes in 2021, which is just about time when that UltraFan engine starts entering testing. And they've already said that the A380 wing has enough clearance to put the UltraFan engine on.
Well, there you go.
So see what happens. I'm not convinced.
That UltraFan, because we'll get onto that now, that is the big version of the geared turbofan, the sort of progression to the higher power, higher thrust, bigger aircraft that we've been anticipating. Now, what's it, about 20% better on efficiency?
Yeah, at least. Yeah.
So you put 4 of those on an A380, man.
Yeah. It's like you got an engine on there for free.
I mean, I'm not trying to be wishful thinking. It is what it is, but you keep your A380s trickling over at a reduced price. That engine hits, suddenly it's a whole new ball game.
Yeah, or there's a break in the A380. They say, oh, we're actually going to stop this production line, but we're going to come back in 5 or 6 years with an ultrafan version, the Neo, blah blah blah, and because all the tooling's all there, the investment's been made. Fair enough, the airlines are not interested in the current version, for better or for worse. It is due for a Neo. Airbus said we're not making a Neo for only one person, and BA said, well, I'm not spending that much money on a Neo anyway, so. Yeah, maybe it is the end of it. It's a pity.
But could you not have a retrofit program where you could take existing A380s, take off their current engines and pylons and do whatever, and put these things on?
They never do that.
Why not?
They never do that, do they? I don't know, but they never do that.
I mean, it'd be a lot cheaper than creating a new aircraft.
They could retrofit A320s, couldn't they? Make them Neos, but they're not going to.
No, because they want to sell new ones.
Yeah, there you go.
I mean, it's not as if they're closing that line down. Anyway, you're probably right. It sounds like it's the end. Speaking of Airbus, we were talking before we started chatting on this podcast that the Airbus super salesman's been dishing out a bit of advice for Boeing, the middle of the market plane, 797. There's been an article locally which tells me that the PR intensity is being ramped up. I don't know, Boeing obviously want to bring that up and have it talked about, but Mr. Leahy of Airbus is saying, no, guys, you got your eye on the wrong ball.
Yeah, he says, yes, don't waste your time coming up with a new plane. Just compete with the A321 because it's already eaten your lunch.
But they got nothing to compete with that. They're sort of snookered.
No, I think history will say they made a mistake when they they needed to get rid of the 757, but they made a mistake when they didn't replace the 757, because if they'd replaced the 757 with something modern back then, they'd still be selling boatloads of them.
Yeah.
Because it's that capacity seems to have come into its own. In fact, it's the middle of the current market, the sort of 150 to 200 seater, which although is vast, it's not showing huge growth. It's the 200 to 250 seater in form of the A321, which is growing really quickly, and then it's the sub 150 seater, which is again showing signs of growth, but only because they've replaced the planes at the bottom range. So the A318, A319 is basically history, and the 737-6 and 700 are basically history. The Embraers have been doing very well, but not as well as they could have, because this C-Series C300 Bombardier, or the A220 as I now call it, man, that's just taken off. It's going really, really well.
Airbus made a great decision in picking that up, because Boeing had that right in front of them, didn't they, for a while?
They had that right, and it all comes down to the fuel economy, doesn't it? You put those geared turbofans on that plane, and suddenly you can run a 120-seater, 130-seater for roughly the same cost as you're running a 180-seater.
It's incredible.
It is incredible, and it all comes down to the engines. And there's multiple ways to skin the cat. So the geared turbofans is an interesting way, but I'm sure GE will come up with something with a gearbox or not. But you look at this ultrafan. I mean, they're going to put a 3.5-meter fan on the front of that thing. So that's quite a lot bigger than I think the GE9X, the new one. I think it's a 3.4 meter, and I think the ultrafan is going to be nearly 3.6.
Wow, the animation going around of that engine concept is quite something to look at, and to see how the gearing's done, and trying to imagine that horsepower going through.
That gearbox is already run. Hey, that gearbox. That's already been developed. They've done that together with a German company, Liebherr. Wow. So the gearbox, they've already tested it up to, I think it's 100,000 horsepower. Wow. They've already tested it.
So also Airbus, as we've discussed before, and I think this is going to happen, to keep Boeing out of this area, all they have to do, is like you've said before, is alter the wing of the current A321 or 320 series, whatever you want to call it, because the ground clearance is there, because the wing is still essentially, isn't it, the mid-1980s wing, substantially, and make it a bit longer, I think, 3 or 4 meters longer, and you've just closed the door again.
Yeah, and that wing You could then have an ultra-long-range A320 if you wanted. You can have a long-range A321. You could have a medium range, and this is exactly where the middle of the market sits. You could have a medium range, so 3.5 to 4,000 mile, 250-seater A322, so a stretched A321. And again, people say, oh, nobody likes to fly in a stretched narrow body. Well, if the airlines really gave a damn what the passengers felt, they wouldn't be retiring the A380s. So it doesn't matter what you think.
And
you're going to get in it and you're going to fly.
And people wouldn't be flying 757s from North America to Europe.
Exactly.
And they do all the time.
Or and they fly 737s and A320s an awful long way these days.
Yeah.
Like you can fly, I think, from here to the Philippines in an A320 now,
That's
A321.
Wow.
Yeah.
So Boeing, the smart cookies, I guess, but this is a real problem. The 737 will not do any more, will it? I mean, that's it.
No. So there's interesting. So the 737, no, it's done its dash, and realistically, the A320 series is getting pretty close to doing its dash. You put a new wing on it, but after a while, you are going to have to look at the fuselage. But Airbus have been very lucky because they've got this C series, which I think will grow to cover up to about the 180 market, and then slowly in the next 10, 15 years, they can replace the 180 to 260 seater market with whatever they want.
How many do we know how many 757s? We could probably easily look it up. Still in service, passenger carrying. It'll be quite a few hundred still, I would imagine.
Oh, that's a good question. I'll ask. Oh,
here we go. Real time asking of the question and almost real-time reply, hopefully. Got to be in the hundreds.
There were 689 Boeing 757 aircraft in service as of July 2018.
Right. Okay.
So comprising 634 757-200s and 55 300s.
Well, the 300s will be passenger.
So that was a year and a half ago.
There you go.
So it's probably not going to be much. It's probably going to be over 600 still.
Well, that's the opportunity that sits right there. One for one, probably.
Yeah.
Okay, so imagine being Leahy, though, now. Wow, because he's retired, right?
Yeah, he's retired, that's it. And he was at a conference, and he said that. He said, if Boeing were paying me, I'd tell them to compete with the A321, not mess around developing a new plane.
Yeah, I'd go along with that.
And they've got other things to put their money in, because when people talk about this UltraFan, you won't get the biggest UltraFan under the wing of the 787 because the main landing gear is too short.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so so the A380's on the way out. I wonder what Leahy thinks about that.
I think Leahy's very, very pragmatic. He says, if it's not making any money, get rid of it.
Yeah. And he's saying that Boeing should be competing with the A321, and that A220 situation has really come up smelling like roses for Airbus. Because I remember at the time we talked about that when Boeing was sniffing around, and boy, they missed an opportunity, didn't they? Wow.
Yeah, and Airbus got given it basically, right?
Yeah.
And it's something like 60 or 68% of the sub 150 seat market as orders are now that aircraft, the A220.
Incredible.
And there's a lot of talk about the bigger one. The 500.
The 500, yeah. Wow.
Yeah. Apparently all the work's done. They just got to build it. We've got the A220 is the most recent plane coming out. Of course, you've got the A350. You've got the new 777s coming, which are going to be awesome with the folding wings and just the massiveness of them. You've got the A350 Neo. Airbus are already talking about the A350 Neo in 2025. There's even talk or resurfaced talk of the A350 1100, so a couple of frames longer, a little bit heavier, UltraFans, and that'll just take it straight to the 777-900, the big one. They'll get within 15, 20 seats of that, but the plane will still be 30 tons lighter and have the same range and use less fuel.
Wow.
So Boeing's response to that's going to be great as well.
Yeah.
Because, Boeing's they're actually, I think they're in a good place because they're making lots and lots of money, but you just hope they have the vision of saying, okay, but we're going to have to make major investments.
Well, that's what I'm thinking. Yeah.
Yeah.
And spend the money.
Spend it. You have to spend it.
And it would have to be almost an out-of-the-park product. That's the other. It's a high bar. Mind you, they're used to that, but it's a real high bar.
That's what the Yanks are always good at. Though they'll pull one out of the hat, But you just hope they do because we kind of expect that from them. That's what they do. But they haven't recently. The 777 new ones, but derivative. It's not that exciting.
I've seen the folding wing mechanism. Remember they offered it on the first 777?
Yeah.
And no one took it up. The mock-up that they made, real mock-up, was stored in the hangar next to where the Museum of Flight stuff was kept at Payne Field. That's at Everett.
Okay.
Boy, you have never seen a hinge like that. I can tell you that.
Yeah.
Incredible.
Yeah, I bet it weighs a bit.
Well, I think it adds a bit of... Mind you, they would have probably refined that anyway. Now, before we hear from Samir Oraki in Ontario, Canada, with what's happening in Canada, the first of our overseas contributors to the New Zealand Aviation Podcast, which could become a bit more global. Let's see how it goes.
Yeah.
I want to look at just another MH370 story, Martin, that's come out, another one. It's getting even weirder now. And also, you've got a list of YouTube channels that you'd like to recommend. We'll do that a bit later on. Let's quickly, before we go to Canada, talk about the 747. February the 9th, 1969, the first flight of the 74 took place. It obviously changed the world. It's hard to believe it was 50 years ago. But I remember as a kid, the first picture I ever saw of a 747 was of a Pan Am one. And that was, they did that comparison that they had on the ramp, the 707 and the Pan Am 747 next to each other. Have you seen that picture? And you could immediately see how much bigger this thing was. And the next thing was one did a flyover of Wellington in 1972, a Qantas one. And we all went up. Dad took us up top of Mount Victoria in Wellington, and we watched the thing fly over. And it sort of flew over the runway at about 200 feet, and it didn't touch down. I think it came through with the gear down, and off it disappeared and landed at Christchurch. And I remember thinking, my golly, it's just so big, and they look so slow, right, in the sky. So those are my memories of the first seeing the 747, and it wasn't until 1980 that Air New Zealand climbed into that particular model. But what about you? You would have seen them, in South Africa for sure?
Yeah, South Africa, and the first time I went on was 1974.
Wow, that's early.
Back to the UK. Flew back to the UK on BOAC, British Airways,
100
with a stop in Kenya. Stopped in Nairobi, and we actually got to sit upstairs, and I've even got the menu somewhere.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
It started as a freighter. If you watch the programs I've made on it, you read the book by Joe Sutter, the father of the 747. That's what they thought it would be. It came out of a mix of a military program and Juan Tripp wanting double-size aircraft. He wanted double-decker all the way through, sort of like the A380 now, I guess. But they wanted to be able to sell it as a cargo plane as well because they thought they'd sell hardly any passenger planes. Well, look what happened. And irony of ironies, now it's back to selling as they originally envisaged all these years later. So that was a great thing to do, is to put that little upper deck in there, because that was a first-class lounge. That BOAC that you went on, that up there would have been the first-class lounge.
Yeah, it was full of sort of avocado green and burnt orange sofas and like little like sort of stooly things. Yeah, no, it was pretty cool. Yeah, went up the spiral staircase, and it was green and brown and reddish, and sat up there, 3 little windows either side. And I just knelt on one of the couches and looked out the window. There was nobody up there. I think it was just my mom and dad, a couple of other people, but not. Yeah, I just remember how empty it was and big.
It didn't take very long before they got about 40 seats in there, and but what an outstanding success! I've heard the 747 described as an icon of the 20th century. I'd go along with that. It is
absolutely,
icon.
Absolutely,
yeah.
It's always good getting on one, you knew, oh, wow, we're going to get there.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. They were so reliable. One of the stories people have heard this before, and I'll be very quick. One of the stories I've always liked, and I saw it or read it in Joe Sutter's book, and that was when he was in the Navy during the Second World War. He was on a ship off the eastern seaboard of the United States, and they got caught in a terrible storm in winter, and the ship got so much ice on it, it became unstable. And there was no way of getting the ice off the ship except chipping it off. And they were very close to capsizing, and they were just very lucky to survive. And there were like 300 people on the ship, and it was, they would have been all over. And he said when he became an aircraft engineer, I think he was already an aircraft engineer before the war, just starting his training, but he was obsessed about redundancy. Yeah. And there's, he wanted the 4 hydraulic systems in the 747, and they came to him and said, it's over budget, drop a hydraulic system. And he said, no way. And then there was that Pan Am 74 that hit the runway lights at the end of San Francisco. The runway had been shortened, people didn't realize. Railway tracks went through the cabin, and I think people were injured, but not too badly. And it was able to come back, and it came back on its number 4 hydraulic system.
Yeah. There you go.
I love that story.
Yeah, no, it's good. Yeah.
So proven, and
vindication.
And there's film of that landing, and once it comes to a stop, it leans back on its gears because the main spar between the two and the body gear or something had been split.
But they fixed it, didn't they?
Yeah, and it flew on for decades.
Yeah, there you go.
Mind you, it was brand new.
Built like a cast iron bridge.
There's footage of the 74 doing a early landing at Renton, I think it is, in Seattle, and they clipped the embankment at the one end of the runway. It's a short runway. And there's footage of it, and it smashes the gear off and everything like that. Well, they had that back flying in a month.
Yeah.
Anyway, so 50 years of the 747, and I think in hundreds of years from now, what's an equivalent that we're talking about? I suppose the first steam train or something. What was that, 300 years ago, 280 years ago, something?
Yeah.
In 300 or 400 years, they'll be talking about the 747 still, for sure.
Well, they'll probably still be one flying in Iran.
Yeah, they'll keep it going.
Yeah, they'll be using it for revenue.
Did you see that they've reactivated? I saw a story only about a month ago of a 747-200 for the Air Force, and it's been sitting for 22 years.
Yeah,
not flying. Incredible.
Yeah, they're still flying their Phantoms.
Yeah, and F-14s.
Yeah, they're still keeping them flying. So, yeah.
Wow. Okay, so salute to the 747. I've filmed them. Many of them did an air-to-air shoot with the 747, and known pilots, and I've been on the original 747, which is now at Boeing Field. And it's just incredible to think how it's changed the world. And those people who made it, and they had to pull that program together in 3 years from nothing, and it ended up being the make or break for the company. It's an incredible story, what they were able to achieve,
It is.
All right. Just before we wind up and we go to Samir in Waterloo, Ontario, Canada, MH370 pilot makes mysterious phone call to aircraft engineer cousin is the latest headline.
Yeah, called his cousin.
Mysterious? How can a call to your cousin be mysterious?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
A month before Malaysia Airlines flight MH370 vanished over the Indian Ocean, less than an hour into its flight, Captain Zahiri Ahmed Shah made a 45-minute phone call that has puzzled investigators for years. It was later revealed the February 2nd, 2014 phone call was between the esteemed Malaysia Airlines pilot and his first cousin, an aircraft engineer, Zulhaimi bin Wahidin. Both men had worked for Malaysia Airlines for decades when the 777 jet with 239 people on board vanished on March 8th, 2014. We know about all of that. Though he insisted, the aircraft engineer, Zulhaimi, insisted his cousin was innocent and lashed out at suggestions, he provided the pilot with technical information that would have given him the ability to hijack the aircraft. This is a fantasy.
Yeah, clutching at straws. I think some news outlets got like an alarm. Feed in a MH370 story every sort of 4 to 6 weeks.
How could a cousin aircraft engineer know more about the 777 than a 777 captain who's been flying it for years and years.
Current pilot too.
Yeah.
Whereas that's an ex-engineer.
And what sort of information? About how to lock the door? I mean, what?
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. Crazy, eh?
Anyway, an official report released in July last year following a lengthy investigation and long-running, fruitless. I think you asked in the last podcast, how much have they spent? $144.8 million. For that money, no clues about why the plane disappeared, sparking anger among relatives. $144.8 million. Wow.
There you go.
Anyway, so there's another
money,
one.
Eh?
Yeah. They're really trying to pin it on the pilot.
Yeah. They always do, don't they?
Well, it's easy because they're not around to defend. But anyone who knows the business knows that it's far-fetched. There are far more credible explanations that involve everyday things that can go wrong rather than some out-of-his-mind, crazed, suicidal, I don't know, delusional airline pilot.
Well, I'll see what they say in 6 weeks, because it'll be another mysterious text or something.
And, you know, where was the co-pilot? What was he doing?
Yeah.
He was way younger than this guy.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that's the latest story. Okay. All right, so we'll come back after we've heard from Samir Raki in Canada, Martin, with your suggestions for YouTube channels. And I think you wanted to talk also about the Yak 152. In fact, let's just cover that off before we go to Canada.
Okay, yeah. Yak 152. It's the Russians are developing a primary trainer. Nothing too exciting about that.
No.
And when you look at the plane, it looks a bit like a Pilatus, maybe a bit smaller, like a PC-7 or a PC-9. Looks pretty cool. But what is very cool about it is, as opposed to using a turboprop, which is pretty common these days, this has actually got a V12 diesel running it.
Oh.
So there's a Russian engineering company based in Germany have developed the 500 horsepower turbocharged V12 diesel. It goes in the front of this thing. Now, this plane will have 3 engine options. It already has the V12 diesel. It also, the base version for initial training, just the first couple of hours, actually has a version of the 360 horsepower radial 9-cylinder that is in most of the Yak aerobatic aircraft. And they're going to put that on the very basic one because it's basically bomb-proof. The V12 diesel is for the next part of the training because it's 500 horsepower, so it's got quite a lot of performance. And if overseas customers really want it, they'll put a turboprop, but the Russians seem to be standing by the fact that they reckon this V12 diesel is the business.
Wow.
Uses less fuel, requires less maintenance, cheaper. They don't say whether it's more reliable, a lot more on it, so I doubt that it's actually more reliable, but there again, it's a maintenance issue. But yeah, it looks really, really, really nice. And they will be selling a civilian version.
Wow.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's
what, exported to the world?
Well, initially it's to fulfill a Russian Air Force requirement, but once it's up and running, or once they've built those, they say they are going to make it available in the civilian market. So if you want a V12 aircraft running diesel or kerosene, there you go.
Weren't the Germans big on diesel power back in the Second World War?
They were. Jumo, Junkers Motoren. Yeah, they had very interesting diesel engines. Some of them were opposed pistons. So instead of having a cylinder head, you had 2 crankshafts and 2 pistons that came together.
Right. Wow. Yeah. Okay. To get the compression, huh?
Yeah, to get the compression. I think they were 2-stroke as well. Very long range. They were designed for very long range. They were ridiculously heavy.
Right. Yeah.
They were huge. They're like ship's engines, but they put them in a few planes. But this Russian, German/Russian V12, it's light, it's modern, it's got all the gear on it, but it's not that big. It gets its power from a couple of turbochargers. But the plane really looks great. Yeah, Yak 152. Go and take a look.
Okay. And the Russians still doing the business, eh?
They seem to be, yeah. They've just also unveiled a new combat drone. And you think, oh, yeah. But then you see some guy's taken a picture of the combat drone being pulled by the standard Russian Air Force tug. And he's got the same picture of a Sukhoi Su-34, that side-by-side bomber based on the Su-27. He's got the same thing being pulled by a tug. And then you realize that this drone, it's massive.
Is that right?
It's typical Russian. They've gone completely over the top. It can carry 5 tons internal.
Wow.
Right? So, yeah, it's in a different league. Yeah. Anyway.
Did you see that footage? I don't know if it's recent or not, but it's of, I think it's a Tupolev Tu-160. Is that the bomber, the B-1?
Breaking in half.
On landing.
Yeah.
Man. Whew. Boy, that was heavy to watch.
Yeah, and one of the guys survived.
That's incredible. Oh, speaking of military, sorry, I didn't mean to jump in on you. It just reminded me that the Wings Over Wairarapa air show in Masterton at the end of February, last weekend of February, B-52 flyover.
Yeah, how cool is that?
Yeah, so I guess they'll come pretty low.
Yeah.
And then they're off to Australia.
Where it's coming in from? Okay, so it's coming in from the Pacific and going on to Aussie.
I think it was coming in from Guam. Okay. So they'll do a low fly over there, and with the 8 engines burning, and then head off to Australia. So that's a cool. Good thing to happen. That'd be worth going just to see that.
It would, actually.
Especially in New Zealand. It's a very rare sight. I don't know if any B-52s have ever visited. Maybe 1 or 2. I can't remember.
You know where the closest B-52 is, if you want to go look at one?
Where?
Darwin.
Oh, they got one on display?
Yeah, in the museum. In the museum just off, not far from Darwin Airport, they've got a B-52.
That's pretty cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
Or was it a Tu-22, the one that crashed? I can't remember. Sorry, I'm
Tu-22 was a Tupolev. It was a backfire. Yeah.
Yeah, the two, I get muddled on those two. They're sort of kind of similar.
Yeah. The 160 is the big, like a Rockwell B1.
Yeah, that's it.
Twice the size.
And the Tu-22's got a swing wing, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Pretty sure, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, okay.
The Tu-22 just looks like a giant fighter plane.
It's incredible.
It's like the size of a 737.
Amazing. I was watching a simulation movie that someone had put up the other day, and it was a squadron of F-18s attacking a squadron of Tu-22s.
Yeah.
Man, the graphics just blew my mind.
Oh, yeah.
Photoreal is the word.
Yeah, amazing,
It's incredible. Anyway. All right, we'll come back and we'll go through those YouTube channels. But now we're going to Canada. As I've mentioned on the New Zealand Aviation Podcast, we're looking to expand out the contributions to the podcast and to look around the world at what's happening, given that we are a global community. I want to welcome Samir Haki to our program from Ontario, Canada. Samir, thank you for being part of the New Zealand Aviation Podcast on the other side of the world.
You're very welcome, Paul, and thanks for having me on board. Hi, folks. How are you?
And we know each other, Samir, through the Bring Our Birds Home campaign. I think you saw what we were doing. And
yes.
You've got some aircraft that are very relevant to the transportation and social history of Pakistan that you've been trying to track down, PIA planes. And you've seen what we have been doing, and we've been talking about how to maybe put those efforts into your part of the world. How's that been going?
It was going pretty good. Right now, the things have slowed down a bit because of the government, and the new government has taken over, the PTI government, and they have quite a bit challenges and issues to take care and, fix the issues within the government and for the people. But we have been in touch with the aviation division personnel and some of the government higher officials, and they really like our idea. They want to do it, but they said that once they take care of PIA, because PIA needs to be revived, then they're going to look into the museum project, and hopefully it will happen.
And, of course, there's a link, isn't there, between Pakistan aviation and Canadian aviation, because I think PIA's DC-10s came from Canada. Wasn't there a swap of 747s for DC-10s between PIA and CPA? I think there was.
Yes, there was a trade. There was a trade happened in 85 or 86, somewhere there. What happened is PIA wanted to basically have fleet of 747s. They liked the 747s. And Canadian CP Air wanted to extend DC-10s. So between them, PIA traded their DC-10s, 4 DC-10s for 4 747s from a CP. So that was a major trade that happened between, like I said, mid-'80s. But PIA like Canada and Pakistan, their flights PIA has been flying in Canada since early '80s.
Wow!
They started off with DC-10s, and then the 747s came in between.
Well, good luck with your efforts, and we'll follow those along the way. And of course, we're following ours as well. So. You know that it takes patience and time to get these things done. I'm sure you're aware of that now. So good luck, and anything we can do to help, let us know. Let's talk about current news in Canada. I guess the most obvious news of recent times to people around the world anyway who follow these things is the addition of the 787-9 to the WestJet airline, which has been a low... Is it correct to characterise that airline as a low-cost carrier that's been, just operating the same fleet, 737s, all this time?
Well, WestJet was at time, as a low-cost carrier, but not anymore. They're actually IATA certified now, and that's why they got the 787s, so they can, fly in, international. As a matter of fact, they started with 767s. They're going to Glasgow, Gatwick, and Manchester. So their idea, they want to expand that, and right now it's a huge thrill going on because WestJet was one of those customers that nobody anticipated would be able to get the 787s, and they actually ended up getting the 9s, and they only got the first ones a few weeks ago. The FIN number 901, the registration is Charlie Golf Uniform Hotel Delta, and they're actually expecting their second 787, I think, in March or maybe in April.
Are they replacing the 767s?
Well, they want to replace the 767s because 767s were only bought for interim use until they get their 787s, and now the deliveries are have started. So once they get, I think, 2 or 3 or maybe 4 Dreamliners, then they're going to, either sell the 767s or they're going to give it to somebody. But I know that those are ex-Qantas machines.
All right, okay. And WestJet has a very large domestic operation. I guess they'll be looking to feed passengers from that operation to their international services. Is that how it's working out?
Well, WestJet is the second largest airline in Canada after Air Canada. As a matter of fact, right now, Canada and WestJet are going head-to-head with each other, and WestJet has a whole dominance on the domestic network, and they're flying within Canada quite a lot, and they're going to U.S. Quite a lot also.
And Air Canada, I think it's the government-owned airline substantially, isn't it? Are they feeling threatened? How are they reacting?
Actually, the Air Canada is a privately owned airline, but government is involved in it, and they're doing pretty good too. They also got their 787-9s not that long ago. They got the 787-8s before, and the 737 Maxes, the 8 Maxes. So they're doing pretty well too. As a matter of fact, I was reading about them. They're considered one of the best airlines in the world.
Wow. Okay. Well, that'll be interesting to see how that goes. You've got a new livery about to launch for Flair Air. How long have they been around?
Flair Air has been around for some time now. It's a low cost airline in Canada. They actually rebranded, did the rebranding again one of their aircraft, and they released the livery. It's like a chocolatey brown with Flair Air, written in brown on the tail, and they have like this lime green color on the belly and the engine itself. So there's quite a bit. They're getting quite a bit of flack from the public about it but I mean it's to one its own. Some people will like it, some people won't. But they just rebranded themselves.
as long as people are paying attention, I guess, is the main thing. And also, you got a new low-cost airline starting up, 2 A320s. What's that airline about?
That airline is called Canada Jetlines. We've been hearing about them for last year and a half, and they are supposedly be able. They will be starting sometime in this year, probably in June or July, with 2 A320s, and they market themselves as ultra low fare carrier. So once they come in, with the main players, then we'll see how their services are. But they have been promising quite a bit, actually, if you see on social media.
I noticed that temperatures in Canada have been extremely cold lately, and this interests me. One of your local regional fly-ins is all about the concept of being frozen. Tell us about that.
Oh yeah, I mean, recent, like 2 days ago, we had a huge major storm here in southern Ontario. Pretty much whole on to southern Ontario got dumped with a lot of snow. There's quite cold too because of that. And then even today here in Kitchener, Waterloo area, it's been snowing the whole day today. But regarding this fly-in, it's slightly north from us. There's a place called Huronia Midland Airport. It's a regional airport. And those guys have been doing this frozen fly-in, they call it, where they invite all regional general aviation pilots to fly in. You see anything from Piper Cub to Cessna 420. Sometimes you see a small jets like Phantom there too. It's more of a general aviation get-together, and pilots come from everywhere, and they sit, they eat. The airport has a variety of food that you can have, nice dishes, and then they chat aviation, and off they go. So it's a nice get-together between the winter.
Yeah, I think and
I'm looking forward to going there this Saturday with a friend of mine, and I will be flying with him in an RV9.
Oh, fantastic. It reminds me of what the Americans call the $300 hamburger, when they go off and fly into an airport and have a hamburger and go home again, except it's frozen.
Here they call here they call a $100 burger.
Yeah, okay, it's not as expensive. And there are plenty of events coming up, and we'll talk about them as we do more of these podcasts, including some of the air shows that are on the way. One thing that Kiwis, that New Zealanders will relate to is the Harvard, because we had Harvards here as trainers for our Air Force, and I know that quite a few New Zealand.
I think every country of the world had the Harvards at one time or the other. There was the main primary trainer.
And people speak very fondly of the aircraft. I think even Kiwis trained in Canada, there was some deal going there. So you've got the Harvard Association, and there's a get-together.
Yes, it's the association here is in Tillsonburg, Ontario, which is not too far from Kitchener, and they are called Canadian Harvard Associations. And what they do is they find derelict harbors and restore them back to airworthiness. They have about 7 or maybe 10 Harvards that are flying currently, and we see them throughout all the air shows that have happened in southern Ontario, here in Canada. And these guys are doing really, really well. And it's amazing how they find those airplanes, and then a few years later, that airplane actually flies again.
Yeah. It's a miracle.
And it is. And one of my friends called Pat Hanna, he's an ex-president of the Canadian Harvard Association. So he keeps telling us all these stories and how they're restoring and, what's happening, from one week to the other. It's just amazing what these guys are doing there.
Well, that's a bit of shared history there. And as you say, the aircraft were a feature of a lot of training for a lot of Air Force around the world since the 40s. So, all right. So let's talk about the 50th anniversary of the 747. We have to mention it.
Lovely. In
Canadian history, I think Air Canada was pretty early on for the 747-100. First one came, I think, in 71. The 100 series, all the way through to 2004 when they stopped operating the 747. I think there was Ward Air, was another airline in Canada, and CP Air. They all had 747s.
Yes, they did. And 747 has been a pinnacle aircraft in Canadian aviation history. It's well-liked airplane, but because of the economy has changed, right now Air Canada doesn't have any of those 747s, but up till 2004 they had 3 747-400s, which were combi variants, and they flew them quite a lot. And when I used to work at the airport, I used to refuel those 747-400s, and to me, it was mind-boggling seeing such a huge machine, lifting off the ground and becoming lighter in the air. It was just like visually seeing it mind-boggling.
When I talk to people about our Bring Our Birds Home campaign, and one of the aircraft on the list that we have is the last remaining Air New Zealand 747 in the world, and that's a 400, they sort of look at me, and I try to tell them the experience of standing underneath one of those machines is quite an awe-inspiring experience. Would you agree?
Oh, it is. It's a mind-blowing experience because, I mean, when you are inside the terminal, you can see the airplane, you walk through the jet bridge, you go into the aircraft, sure, you have seats and everything. You are inside the airplane, but you can't imagine the sheer magnitude, the size of this airplane. This thing is huge. And I still remember the times that I was under the 747. It was just enormous aircraft. I couldn't believe how big this airplane is when you're actually walking under the wing root of it. It's just like it's never ending. It's huge.
And filling it up, it'd take a few gallons, wouldn't it, eh?
Oh yeah. It takes about, it used to take 3 hours or 3.5 hours for us to refuel a Korean 747 that used to go Seoul directly from Toronto, and we used to put fuel in the step tanks, which are in horizontal stabilizers. And man, during the winter, it was something to refuel that airplane.
Yeah.
And after it's done, you can see the wings, wings with the fully leaden, and the wing tips are bending down. The wheels are almost half, it looks like they are flat, but they're not flat. They were like squished right down, like you can see rims not too far from the ground.
Yeah, because they took about 110, 120 tons of fuel, the 400 fully loaded, wasn't it?
Yes, something like, I can't remember exactly. It's been such a long time, but they take quite a bit. What I do remember, that Air Canada would take about 60,000 liters from Toronto to Heathrow, and that would be enough to go there with a full aircraft. Mind you, these were combis, and then they would come back and they would refuel coming back. So yeah, they take a lot of fuel.
I know the Gimli glider was let go. Can you believe that they let the Gimli glider be demolished?
That's the sad part. It's one of those sad things, in Canadian aviation history. I mean, Air Canada looked at it as a black spot, and they literally got rid of it. But if you think about it, I mean, sure, incident happened for whatever reasons. We're not going to get into that, but everybody was safe when the airplane landed. Everybody survived. Airplane survived, and airplane flew years after that incident. And I remember, like late 90s, early 2000, servicing that airplane by refueling it. I've refueled the Gimli glider, the CGA-UN. So I mean, I just don't understand sometimes how airlines think, and they work. But that airplane should have been saved.
Might just look in to see if there are any bits left. There might still be the fuselage and the wings left somewhere in the desert.
There are. There's a whole. There's a sections of the fuselage in Mojave.
Right.
Wings are still there, and in Gimli, Manitoba, they actually made a museum, and in there they have actual fuselage sections of the fuselage, window cutouts. I think parts of landing gear, and quite a bit more parts that I've heard that they were able to get for that museum there.
Yes,
so
the story.
Not everything is lost. Some has been saved, but that particular airplane should have been saved.
I agree with you. Probably the most famous 767 in the world. Samir, that's our first chat on the New Zealand Aviation Podcast. Thanks so much for coming on, and we'll talk again in the next few weeks. How's that?
perfect, Paul. Thanks for having me on board, and I would love to be able to come up with in future podcasts and talk more about Canadian aviation and maybe the aviation history also, in those podcasts.
So, Martin, good to hear from Samir up there in Ontario, Canada. And it was great to hear him talking about the local stuff and to hear his description of refueling the 7.4 and everything. Fantastic.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, the refueling bit is very interesting. Yeah,
interesting. I should have asked him. He was talking about filling up the stabilizer fuel tanks in the vertical stabilizer. I don't think they could feed fuel directly into the engines from there. They were pumped.
No, it's like a holding tank. Yeah.
And he said it took, I think, 3 hours to do the Korean Air plane that they had to do that with. I should have asked him, maybe there was a different routine for getting fuel up into that part of the plane. And you can imagine if it's 50 below zero in a blizzard, it can't be a very enjoyable process.
Well, that's we think we have bad weather, but they have just appallingly bad weather.
Yeah.
They have dangerously bad weather,
And the Gimli glider, he mentioned it also had fueled that aircraft up quite a few times. I still don't know why they didn't save that. I mean, come on, Canada.
Oh, yeah.
Crazy. I'm going to see if I can find any bits of that. Maybe we can put it with a Bring Our Birds Home, because that is a famous aircraft. And even if the fuselage and the wings are still around, substantially, that's it. It's still worth saving because, I mean, that's a real story of comeback. Everyone survived. The plane went back into service, and it's world famous. And they let it go. Crazy.
Yeah. No, they're not sentimental, those Canadians.
Well, it's too late. You see, that's the problem. And then you get sentimental because things come in phases and fashions, and you go, oh, it's a pity no one, Anyway.
Yeah, we should have kept that.
YouTube channels.
YouTube channels, yes. So I don't know what's happening with you guys out there, but certainly with me, YouTube's taking up more and more of my viewing time.
Same.
Very convenient whenever I want to sit down and watch something. Now, I have a lot of subscriptions, which I have to cull regularly. Here's four. Two are aviation related, and two have nothing to do with aviation whatsoever. So there's Trent Palmer. Just do a search on Trent Palmer. He's got a Kit Fox, and he goes flying all around western states of America with his mates. He flies drones. He's a cinematic drone operator. And but when he's at home, he's got a landing strip on his farm or on his ranch, whatever it is, and he goes bush flying with his Kit Fox and, like I said, a couple of his mates, and they get up to all sorts of very interesting things. And they talk a lot about the planes and how they fly, and he goes to fly-ins and he catches up with people flying Super Cubs and all sorts of things. One of his fairly regular guests flies a Polish Wilga that he's substantially modified into a super bush plane. Like, this thing it's pretty amazing. So yeah, that's one. Trent Palmer, really good. There's another one, Mikey McBrien. He's the son of the owner of Buffalo Airways in Canada.
Oh, I've talked to Bruce. I've talked to the owner.
Yeah, well, his son, Mikey, he's got this channel, Plane Savers, and he puts out a video like every 2 or 3 days, sometimes daily. And he's going around Canada and the cold states of America, picking up old airplanes. And recently, they went down to Montreal and picked up an old C-47.
Wow.
The recent episode, it's a Dornier, one of those. I think it's a Dornier 27, single engine, the same one that guy used to fly around in Kenya.
Oh yeah,
in the animal thing. So that's really good. Mikey McBrien's really good. And again, you're seeing them flying in very austere environments.
Yes.
Now, I've got a whole lot of more aviation ones, but I'll get to them at another time. There's another really cool, if you're into, I know a lot of people aren't, if you're into watching machinists practice their art, there's a guy called a channel A-Bomb 79, and he runs a machine shop out of his shed in Florida, and obsessive perfectionism as he takes half a thou off this and adds a thou there, milling and grinding and broaching and all that type of thing. That's a cool video. And there's another one for the more people of a more artistic bent. There's a guy called Martin Wintergatten, and it's Winter, Wintergaten, and he's making a marble machine that plays music. This guy's a musician, like a musician's musician. But he's also an obsessive marble machine guy, and he's making this incredibly complicated marble machine that circulates marbles around and through various musical instruments via a programming wheel, and shoots and guides and magnetizes and demagnetizes and lifts, and he's making the whole thing himself. Well, he's got a whole lot of collaborators around the world, but he's making the whole thing himself. His team is making this whole thing out of plywood, plastic tubing, and various CNC cut bits of metal brackets and everything. But it's just really, really interesting the lengths these guys are going to get, as Martin always says, really tight music. He's got a very Swedish accent, but it's really good. It's Wintergatan is good. Mikey McBride's very good. Trent Palmer's great, and A-Bomb 79 is very relaxing if you like watching people cut steel.
Well, fantastic. Yes. I'm going to go check those out. And I was just thinking that, yes, there are, on the aviation side, I've noticed a Big Jet TV. They do live streaming out of Heathrow. Now, the pictures aren't very steady, and it can be a little difficult to watch at times because they're spinning things around, and obviously the camera mounts and everything haven't quite got there. But it's a great concept, and I think you're going to see more of that, live streaming action with a commentary out of,
Oh, yeah, that's good. But, I mean, as you mentioned earlier, that guy Captain Canada, that's awesome.
Oh, yeah, and that's going to be great when we talk to him. That's virtual, and
that's virtual,
and just as entertaining. It's quite crazy. Yeah. Also, another thing I've been really enjoying is some of the radio-controlled model footage that's out there now. People are building seriously big models of airliners and military planes that look fantastic. I've been watching, there's a guy, I think Rami RC is the channel on. Rami RC,
I was going to mention him another episode. Yeah, he does some amazing stuff.
And you could see the materials and how it's done and the way he gets the undercarriage and working and all those things.
I've got a couple of channels that I'll go into where you actually see the guys making things.
Yeah,
and
it's great.
It's very interesting.
Yeah, and you can see how light they have to keep it, and the tricks of the trade, to get the shapes and to make it look convincing.
And it just shows you how easy electric motors and that it made things.
Yeah, and
the hassle. I don't know if you were a kid, your dad bought you, my dad bought me a control line aeroplane, and after 5 hours trying to get that damn baby bee to start, I think it went into the back of the cupboard, and that was the end of it. Those little engines were a nightmare.
Yeah, well, now it's a whole new next level, as they say. I feel sorry for the guys who crash. A lot of work can be... and the other thing that interests me, even at the scale, you see, even the F-104 starfighters will fly beautifully. And they hardly got any wings.
Yeah. And there's a German guy... he doesn't really have a channel, but I watch a few of his videos. He's getting an electric plane up to, I think it's 554 kilometers an hour is his record so far.
Wow.
That's how fast he's getting it. Yeah, 312 miles an hour or something. Yeah, ridiculous.
Maybe next podcast we could look at some of the ideas that the Democrats in the US are coming out there. I think their Green New Deal and what... people have been saying regards air travel in the plans that they have for that.
Yeah.
It just makes electric aeroplanes, well, actually it might be a good thing. It might spur on the development of those things, but we can talk about that later. Anyway, we're sort of out of time for a substantial Bring Our Birds Home update, Martin, so folks should go to the Facebook page. That's facebook.com/Bring Our Birds Home to get the very latest. There's some great news there. An additional aircraft we're looking for now, very famous, very significant aircraft, especially in South Island, New Zealand, operational history. And we got a really good article in the Otago Daily Times this week as a result of that. Thank you to journalist Mark Price for being interested. So go to the Facebook page for Bring Our Birds Home update. Anyway, so as always, good to talk, Martin. And how long are you back in New Zealand for before you go wherever you go next?
I never know.
Aren't you going to go and live in Cyprus or something, or was it...
Yeah, that'd be cool.
No, what was the other place you went to?
Malta.
Sorry, it was Malta I was thinking of.
Oh, East Timor. I went to East Timor as well.
Yeah,
Go live there.
you have your holiday home there.
Yeah,
Your beach batch.
No, it's all right.
No. All right, so we'll have another podcast hopefully in about a week's time from now. And just to remind again, we have Steve Thomas coming on talking about his father, Captain Dave Thomas's time at NAC, flying the 737s, and also Captain Canada, I think, within the week as well. We've been communicating. He's all on, and I think it's going to be very entertaining. It's one of the better shows on YouTube, and the channel is Captain Canada. All right. Until we talk again, Martin, it's goodbye from me, and
see you later.